The game Aether World. This game was released 10 years ago as a dating simulator game with a target market of female players, but ended up having more male players. This game allows players to play a wide variety of characters, ranging from easy but very efficient characters, to difficult but inefficient characters. Among them, there was one trash character known for his difficulty and poor features. There was one pervert player who focused on this character, Baek Yuseol, for 10 years. While wringing his hands, he wondered, then should I start? The player in question was him. It was late afternoon, inside an apartment in a city. Baek Yuseol was currently surfing the game Aether World forum while sipping a cup of coffee. He was then surprised when he saw many new posts. When he just opened the forum, the posts seemed to be discussing some kind of bug or update in the game, but they didn't seem to be happy about it. They cursed and cursed the game. They had the same experience that their game data was deleted when dealing with the boss named Dark Demon Dragon. Reading that, Yuseol realized that the dragon was the final boss of this dating sim game. He was quite surprised and confused by this. He thought the game just ended when you became a couple with one of the characters. When Yuseol continued to scroll through the posts on the forum, he then saw one of the posts that came from a player with the nickname Bunapwinsis. She said that this boss could not be defeated at all. This damn Dark Demon Dragon had 99% magic resistance passive without cooldown time and continued to attack her with magic absorption skills and some magic exuding thing. She was really confused about how to kill it. She was very sure that this was a bug. Looking at the name on the player who posted the post, Yuseol then remembered that she was that famous Rancor. While putting down his coffee cup, he then pondered for a moment. He felt that it didn't make sense if there were monsters with magic nullifying skills in the magic world. He doubted, was this really a bug? People also said that their characters were deleted. As Yuseol continued to explore the forum, he then saw a post telling him that the Dark Demon Dragon, 13th moon of the Black Knight, had appeared. Yuseol then clicked on the post to read more. In the Aether World, there is a cult-like organization called Dark Demonic Human. Their goal is to help an otherworld figure called Persona Gate to rule this world, and when they achieve that goal, the Dark Demon Dragon will appear. Yuseol was surprised to find out that 90% of the continent was already controlled by the Persona Gate. He only thought about PvP and ignored the story. Now the whole lore was messed up. He wondered, is this okay? Whatever it is, he realized that it doesn't mean he can avoid fighting it. He then decided to just give it a try. After setting his goal, Yuseol then immediately logged into the game, and prepared to fight the Dark Demon Dragon. Just before Yuseol entered the game, he with a dignified face thought, I will show off the skills I have honed for the past more than 10 years. Just when he just entered the game, he then saw a huge dragon monster in front of him. It was the Dark Demon Dragon. Yuseol's face looked very serious at this time. If he had to explain his character, Baek Yuseol, he was the only character in the game who could not use magic, although everyone in this game could use magic. Because of that, even most experienced players chose not to play it. In short, he was worse than the extra characters. Of course, he could use some magic, although only one. Seeing the lowly human in front of him, the Dark Demon Dragon then opened its mouth wide, and threw a dragon's breath at him. Yuseol was surprised for a moment to see such a powerful attack directed at him, but he then grinned dismissively. He then changed places so quickly that it was like using a teleport to avoid the Dark Demon Dragon's attack. It is the only skill that Baek Yuseol has and can use when using the character, Blink. After retreating backwards, Yuseol then adjusts his position again. The Dark Demon Dragon roars angrily to see him successfully avoid its attack. It then throws another attack on him. Baek Yuseol's blink allowed him to move between 3 to 10 meters randomly very quickly. The direction was completely random. So if he didn't control his distance well, he would instantly die from the speed and impact. On top of that, the cooldown time and mana usage is ridiculous. There was also a penalty that made you unable to move for 2 seconds after using the skill, so although anyone could learn this skill, but most people wouldn't use it. But Baek Yuseol was different. He had mastered the use of blink. He could control the direction he went and also the distance. He has also managed to nullify the penalty. Blink doesn't use up mana since he doesn't even have a mana stat. Unlike other magic, Blink was just simply a movement ability, but he became obsessed with this character because everything depended on his skill level. So in the past 10 years, he played as the only character in the game who didn't use magic in battle. Ending his thought struggle, Yuseol then returned to attacking the Dark Demon Dragon. Yuseol slashed the monster so hard that its body was almost split into two. After launching the action, Yuseol then casually looked back, towards the corpse of the dark demon dragon. Shortly after that, a notification then appeared: "You have defeated the final boss, 13th moon of the Black Knight." Yuseol was quite surprised to read that. He didn't think he could actually kill it that easily. He knew that he was using ancient relic grade items from head to toe, but even so this was still a trash character. Whatever it was, this was a good result. He was going to show off to the forum that he had successfully killed the dark demon dragon, but, before he could even do that several red notifications suddenly appeared in front of him at this time. Because the wrong ending has been reached, 90% of the Aether World has been destroyed. Yuseol was then shocked and confused to see that. A notification then reappeared: "But, you are the closest to reaching the true ending." Yuseol was stunned to hear that, but his surprise did not stop there. He was then shocked when he was asked to reach the true ending. Before he reacted anything, a whitish light suddenly enveloped him, without anyone realizing it. A magical event had happened to a lonely man who lived in an apartment alone in a city. When Yuseol opened his eyes, he was then confused and shocked by the scene he saw in front of him. He still couldn't wake up from his shock and let himself lie on the floor. He then tried to get up while holding his head. He confusedly wondered what happened. While looking at his surroundings, Yuseol wondered, "Where am I?" As he looked at his surroundings in more detail, he then saw a mirror nearby. Seeing that, he then immediately moved towards it, but he was then surprised by what he saw at this time. He was surprised by his current face and appearance. He realized that this was the Baek Yuseol appearance. Right at that moment, a black screen suddenly appeared nearby. As Yuseol looked towards the black screen, he then saw a text: "Episode 1, Escape the Chase." Yuseol was shocked to read that. He realized that this was Baek Yuseol's prologue quest. He then immediately stood up alertly when he realized that. He still couldn't fully accept the current reality. He then remembered something. He then reached into his left pocket. There, he found something very familiar to him. This is the entrance certificate to Stella Academy. Yuseol gulped when he saw it. This was indeed unbelievable, but he was sure that this must be the Aether World, and what frustrated him was, he had become Baek Yuseol. Throwing away these bad thoughts, Yuseol thought that he had to think logically. The voice told him to reach for the true ending, but from what he knew, this game did not have a true ending, it just had multiple endings. But he then immediately realized something. A conjecture came to his mind at this time. Was it because no one had managed to reach the true ending for the past 10 years? Yuseol was annoyed. He realized that this was not the time for him to think about such things. He then immediately moved towards the exit. If his memory was correct, right after Baek Yuseol woke up, the people who were chasing him entered this hut, and sure enough, just as he was about to exit the building, he then saw a lot of people wearing robes outside. Seeing that, Yuseol then immediately hid himself from them. He could only curse. They were already here. While they were walking down the road, one of them then saw a hut nearby. They then decided to look for him there. Seeing that, Yuseol then thought hard to get out of this desperate situation. In the game, there's a limit to how long he can avoid them, but he can't fight them either. Yuseol clenched his hands tightly. He was confused about what he should do, but he was then surprised when a screen suddenly appeared in front of him. You can use the blink skill. Yuseol was then surprised when he read it. With a body suffering from mana leakage syndrome, Baek Yuseol, who could not accumulate mana in his body, had only one hope. "I can only hold on to the spells I have been practicing all my life." That was what he thought as he repeatedly practiced blink. Back to the present, Yuseol was silent for a moment, knowing that he could use the blink skill. The blink he currently had only had a maximum range of 9 meters, with a cooldown of 3 seconds in each use. Reading that, Yuseol thought, so I should use blink now, but he felt hesitant. Because he had only ever used blink in games when controlling his character with a mouse and keyboard, but his pursuers would certainly not give him so long to think. Yuseol was then startled when he heard many footsteps heading towards his place. He could only curse. He was shocked to find out that they had come this far. He realized that time was tight at the moment. He could only try. When the robes men were about to enter the hut, they were then surprised when they saw Yuseol fleeing there. Seeing that, they then immediately ran after him. That chase scene is the first part of the tutorial. The purpose of this tutorial is to avoid the pursuers. By using blink, Yuseol continued to run in the middle of their chase, but he realized that the people chasing him were much faster than him, because they used magic boots, meaning, the only way he could escape from them was to use blink. right before he used Blink. Yuseol then told himself to calm down. He encouraged himself that he had used Blink many times, the timing of its use was already very engraved in his mind. When the distance between the people chasing him was very close to him, they then angrily asked him, "Bastard, when will you stop?" Hearing that, Yuseol then looked back for a moment. He realized that they were getting closer. The main disadvantage of Blink is that if the user fails to control the distance, they will collide with objects in front of them and die immediately. However, the result was different if Baek Yuseol used it, when his pursuers were right behind him and were about to attack him. Yuseol then immediately used Blink. When the person's attack finally landed on him, Yuseol suddenly disappeared and appeared not far from there as if teleporting. Yuseol himself was surprised by that. He felt very happy to see it work. His pursuers were also surprised to see him able to move so quickly to avoid the attack range of their leader. They wondered, was it Blink, was he a mage? Seeing their surprise, the leader then told them not to worry. He explained, after using Blink, the user is always paralyzed for 2 seconds, it would be an opportunity for them. But, he was then surprised when he looked at Yuseol who was running. He was confused why he could still move. Yuseol certainly would not kindly explain it to them. He ran with all his might to escape their chase. In the midst of his escape, Yuseol told himself to be more careful. Seeing the narrow gap in front of him, Yuseol thought that he had to use this uneven terrain to his advantage. Because players who could not learn how to control Blink in this stage, would not be able to move on to the next episode. In fact, 99% of players who played Baek Yuseol could not pass this tutorial, and even the 1% who succeeded could not get through the wall of Blink distance control and continuous blinking. Ending his thoughts, Yuseol then started counting in his head. After the count reached 1, he then immediately used Blink to pass the obstacle in front of him. Yuseol's movements were so fast that it felt like using a teleport by leaving an afterimage behind. His pursuers were shocked. When they saw it, they felt Yuseol was out of his mind using Blink in that kind of terrain. The leader then ordered his men who could use magic to come forward. He told them to attack Yuseol from a distance. Hearing that, those who could use magic then immediately came forward. Seeing that familiar scene, Yuseol wondered, would they use magic? He now entered the second part of the tutorial. The purpose of this tutorial was to use Blink to avoid the magic arrow launched at him. In the game, he could see everything because he was in front of the screen, so he could dodge everything. But now it was clearly different. In the midst of this serious situation, a notification screen suddenly appeared in front of him. The mana leakage syndrome skill had been used. The mana leakage syndrome derivative skill, Sixth Sense and cognitive acceleration were being used. Right when the notification appeared, Yuseol suddenly felt a change when looking at the world. He seemed to be able to see further. And when the magic arrows were about to fall on him, he was suddenly able to quickly avoid the magic arrows with nimble movements, and when one of the magic arrows was about to stab at him, Yuseol thought that it was time. After taking a step, he then immediately used Blink to avoid the barrage of magic arrows. After successfully avoiding their attacks, Yuseol then looked back. There, he then saw the ground that had been rolled out by the magic arrows earlier. Yuseol breathed a cold breath. Seeing that, he almost met his death earlier, but he knew that he was not out of this dangerous situation yet. He then ran back to escape their pursuit. The next is the last part. After Yuseol ran for who knows how long until it made his breath catch, he then saw a cliff in front of him. The cliff was so deep that he could not see the bottom. This was the location of the third part of the tutorial. He was required to cross the cliff using Blink. It was certainly a very difficult thing because there were few places he could use as a foothold. The only way to pass it was to control his Blink distance perfectly. Then, he could meet the passing mages and run away with them. That was the final scene of this tutorial. In order for him to get through this one part, he had to cancel his Blink, which happened in 0.1 second, perfectly. If he failed even once, then he would die here. There were about 20 big rocks floating there. Although the theory sounded easy, but doing it was not that easy. He was also quite annoyed at this time. What kind of jerk made this kind of tutorial? But, honestly, Yuseol still felt quite confident that he could do it. The problem was, while Yuseol was thinking hard about it, his pursuers then slowly reached his place. Hearing their footsteps, Yuseol then looked back. The people chasing him were much closer than he expected. The distance he had with them was about 100 meters. Since Blink had a cooldown of 3 seconds, the time would not be enough if he wanted to pass through this canyon. While clenching his hands tightly, Yuseol then thought, it seems that the most likely way for him to survive is to kill them all. In the midst of heavy snowfall, at the edge of a cliff in a canyon, Yuseol was hiding there from his pursuers, although he had decided to fight against them, but even he himself felt that this was really crazy. He never thought he could do something like this while he himself had never experienced real combat. If this was a game, the system would definitely not let him attack those people who were chasing him, but this is reality. There is no rule that says that he must always follow the system in the game. Seeing his pursuers who were getting closer to him, Yuseol then took out a knife. The thought of killing others did not bother him at all. The reason was not because they were his parents' enemies in the story, but only because he thought he could win against them. As Yuseol was preparing, he then saw his pursuers who were already right behind him. Seeing that, Yuseol did not hide anymore. He then appeared before them. They looked surprised to see him dare to appear before them. The leader looked very angry when he saw him. He then ordered his subordinates to arrest him right now. Hearing that, they then immediately moved to attack him. They advanced recklessly without taking into account Yuseol's strength at all. They seemed to really underestimate him. They felt that his decision was really stupid for daring to fight them alone. They were very confident that they could finish Yuseol here. While Yuseol himself was thinking very hard at this time, he was measuring the distance between himself and the enemy in front of him, and when the distance between them reached 8.7 meters, Yuseol then used Blink. He was really surprised at this time. The leader also looked confused and surprised by what he saw at this time. Yuseol, who was still quite far away from him, suddenly appeared right in front of him. Not only that, he also stuck his knife into his body. It made him spit out a mouthful of blood. The blood vomit splashed on Yuseol's determined face. Yuseol could clearly feel the fresh blood splashing down through his face, and strangely, he didn't feel the slightest feeling of guilt. After all, he only killed them to survive. After that, Yuseol then slashed his knife at the man. After making him helpless, Yuseol then violently hit the man's body. It made the man's body thrown strongly towards them, and when their attention was distracted by the throwing of the man's body, Yuseol did not waste the opportunity and immediately ran away. From there, after waking up from their shock, they then returned to chase him. Yuseol thought that he had to face them one by one, but he realized that his next attack would definitely not be as easy as before because they were already prepared. He then thought very hard about how he could launch his attack as smoothly as before, but he was then confused when he did not hear the sound of footsteps from behind him. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. He wondered if they were not chasing him anymore, and when he looked back, he then saw his pursuers who were just standing there, but he knew that they had not given up. They were still chasing him. He wondered, would they use magic again? Yuseol did not feel so worried. He thought that he just needed to dodge it, but he then could only curse when his feet could not stand properly because of the slippery ground. After the magic cast was finished, the leader then ordered them to cast it now. Hearing that, the witches then aimed at him, and cast fire magic towards him. Yuseol felt very anxious and panicked when he saw a lot of fire magic directed at him. His situation was really dangerous at the moment. The fire magic attacked him from various directions. Yuseol could only curse seeing that the range of the attack was too wide for him to avoid, but he certainly would not give up until there. While he was thinking very hard to get out of this desperate situation, he then saw a branch stuck in a large rock in front of him. Seeing that, he then used Blink. Right when Yuseol used Blink, the fire magic finally landed where he originally stood. The impact of these attacks was so powerful that it destroyed what he was exposed to. After the flames slowly disappeared, it resulted in a scene that looked like a forest burning in the middle of a snowfield. One of them then walked slowly over there, with a cruel grin on his face. He said that it was indeed a fitting punishment for someone like him, but, as the smoke generated from the fire magic slowly dissipated, he then saw something strange. He was confused. Why was there absolutely no one there? In the midst of his surprise, Yuseol, who he thought was dead, suddenly appeared behind him while carrying a dagger in his hand. Shock could be seen clearly in his eyes at this time when he saw him. One of the characteristics of Blink is to keep the momentum before and after use. While gritting his teeth, Yuseol then used Blink. It made him instantly arrive in front of him and thrust his knife into his stomach before he could even react. The environment was suddenly silent when they witnessed it. They simply could not understand what they were seeing at this time. With a feeling of confusion and surprise, they wondered what happened. The scene was indeed shocking because Yuseol was able to finish off someone who was trained alone. The leader still could not wake up from his shock when he witnessed the scene. Yuseol still stood still in his place after successfully launching the action. His breath seemed to be panting, doing so did not seem easy for him. While looking at them, he then thought, now there are only 2 people left, he must finish them off before the 2 behind catch up here. Yuseol then pointed his knife at them. Seeing that, the leader said to him that he was quite strange, he had an unusual reaction speed for a mage. He then asked him, who are you? Hearing his question, Yuseol then thought, my reaction speed is faster than most professional gamers. But that only applies when talking about games. Yuseol realized that he couldn't keep dodging their attacks forever, especially since he could attack from a distance. He then thought that he had to end this as soon as possible. Seeing him rushing towards them, while holding the hilt of his big sword, the leader with a confident smile said that he already knew how to fight. During their fight against Yuseol, he concluded that he only used blink and a dagger, as long as he could protect his face and neck. Then the dagger would not be able to hurt him. When the distance between the 2 of them was close enough, he then silently challenged Yuseol to come forward. Coinciding with that, he also cast ice wave magic. Not only him, Yuseol also returned to using blink at this time. After the ice wave casting was complete, he then threw it towards Yuseol. A mound of ice then appeared where he was standing. The leader smiled happily because he thought his ice wave had successfully hit him. All he needed to do now was to watch that annoying face drown in pain, but he was then shocked when he heard a cry of pain from behind him, and when he looked back, he then saw a scene that shocked him very much. Yuseol, who he thought was dying and just waiting to die, suddenly appeared behind him and finished off his subordinate. He then woke up from his shock when he saw the corpse of his subordinate who fell to the ground. He cursed. He felt quite anxious and panicked at this time, before he kept running away like a rat who didn't know how to fight. But now, before he could finish his sentence, Yuseol then interrupted him. With a grin on his face, Yuseol thanked him for making him better. The leader was furious at his insult. He angrily told him not to expect to survive just because his friends could not catch him. Right after he said that, Yuseol then moved towards him, with a hand that was now also holding a spear. Yuseol then vigorously threw the spear towards him. Seeing that, the leader then prepared to parry the throw. He knew that using blink face to face like this had the risk of being hit back directly. He wondered if Yuseol was deliberately luring him into protecting the front by throwing a spear and then attacking from the side. Realizing that, he then thought that he would not let things go as he wanted. He then cleaved the spear in half with his sword, with a triumphant smile on his face. He then thought that now he only needed to attack him when he moved next to him. But, he was then stunned when he only slashed empty air when slashing to his side. He was really confused at this time, and when he finally woke up from his shock, it was too late, because Yuseol had already stabbed his dagger right in his heart. It made him wonder whether he had planned to attack from the front from the beginning. Shortly after that, Yuseol then heard a notification. Episode 1, Escape the Chase has been completed. You have obtained EXP, you have been promised an additional reward for developing the story in a unique way by the Constellation Project. After the situation was finally safe, Yuseol then limply let his body fall to the ground. He was breathing heavily, which indicated that he was very exhausted at this time. His hands were also shaking violently, which made him unable to hold his dagger anymore. He then glanced next to him, towards the corpse of his pursuer who was lying limp beside him. Blood was seen flowing from the stab wound inflicted by Yuseol earlier, soaking the ground there. Seeing such a tragic scene, Yuseol swallowed. He then realized that this was not a dream. His first blink, his first battle, and his first murder. Yuseol was silent for a moment when thinking about it. He then comforted himself. I killed someone to survive. After resting for a moment and regaining his composure, Yuseol then stood back up. He sighed while looking at the snow plain in front of him. Yuseol then set his goal. For now, he decided to leave this place first. But he then remembered something. There were things he needed to do before leaving. He then glanced at the corpses of his pursuers, but his face looked a little hesitant at this time. After setting his mind, Yuseol then took all the valuables from the corpses of his pursuers. Although this left a bitter taste, but Yuseol realized that he had to think realistically as he had no money at the moment. After rummaging around for a while, he then found a pouch. The pouch contained about 2 million credits, that's about 2 million won. This was better than nothing. After successfully overcoming one problem, Yuseol was now faced with another problem. Yuseol then walked slowly forward, while looking towards the deep ravine in front of him. Yuseol was confused about how he could cross the ravine safely, but he was then surprised when he heard a shout from someone. when he looked towards the source of the sound. He then saw a group of people on the other side of the cliff. Seeing them, Yuseol thought, aren't they the group of mages that appeared in the tutorial? Realizing that, he then immediately shouted to them. One of the mages said that there was no bridge here. He asked him if he could cross. Yuseol replied yes, he was in the process. Hearing that, the mage then invited his group to wait there because he said he would cross. Hearing that, one of his friends was hesitant because to cross this cliff, he had to be at least third-class knight. He hesitantly wondered if that man could do it. Hearing that, he said that he was not sure, but he was then surprised by what he saw at the moment. It was the scene when Yuseol crossed the canyon using Blink. They could only gape when they witnessed it. Yuseol moved from one place to another so quickly that he left an afterimage behind him. Seeing that, they confusedly wondered, is it a jump-type magic? Seeing their confusion, a mage who was behind then answered. It was Blink. Hearing that, they then both turned their heads towards the mage. She turned out to be a female mage with purple hair adorning her head. The mage who called Yuseol earlier was confused when he heard the answer, because as far as he knew Blink could not be controlled by direction and distance, so he was confused. How could Yuseol jump so skillfully? But he was then confused again when he looked at the other side of the cliff. There were two people in robes who were standing while looking at them there. Seeing them, he wondered, was that man with those two people? His question was then answered shortly afterwards. The two people were of course the two pursuers of Yuseol who were left behind. One of them was seen casting a magic at this time. After the magic casting was complete, he then threw it at Yuseol. Seeing this, the mages who saw then immediately warned Yuseol, and just as the magic was about to hit him, Yuseol then immediately used Blink to avoid it. After successfully avoiding the magic, Yuseol then turned his head towards the perpetrator. Towards the two people who were chasing him, he wondered, were they with the mercenary before? Yuseol realized that his situation was dangerous at this time. The cooldown of Blink was 3 seconds, avoiding all the magic they threw at him with it would not be possible. He had to find the next floating stone that would work as his footing, but he was then surprised and worried when he felt a flow of magic from behind him. The flow of magic certainly came from his pursuers. One of them was seen casting a magic at this time, and threw it at him, but fortunately Yuseol was able to quickly react and manage to dodge the attack. The attack really almost hit and hurt him. Some of his hair was seen cut off due to the attack. But, what was dangerous was not that. The floating stones he was standing on suddenly split apart at this time, and Yuseol, who was unable to maintain his balance, then began to fall. But Yuseol did not lose his composure just like that. He then looked around him that he could make a foothold, but he then could only curse, because all the floating stones were too far from his current position. He hoped to land on one of them. After the cooldown ended, Yuseol then used Blink again, and moved quickly towards one of the floating stones nearby, but his landing was not so smooth, because the distance was quite far. He was not directly on the floating stone. Even so, he was grateful to have survived, but his calm was then shattered when he saw a fire magic that was thrown at him. Yuseol was really not in a position that allowed him to dodge the attack. He really felt panic at this time. He felt that he was going to die. But, before the attack could hit, a magic suddenly appeared from the other side of the cliff which then hit the attack towards Yuseol. The magic managed to stop the attack that was launched towards him and saved his life. Yuseol was really shocked when he saw that. He wondered, what the hell was that magic just now? An ice spear coated with lightning. Someone just used 2 attributes in one magic in the tutorial. Not only that, the spellcaster also accurately calculated the aim without wasting any mana. Yuseol wondered, who was able to do something that great? Yuseol then looked at the group of mages who called him earlier. In the middle of the group of mages, there was a female mage with a wand in her hand. She was the one who had saved him earlier. The two people who were chasing Yuseol were surprised when they saw such a great attack. They then panicked and decided to leave immediately from there. Seeing the departure of the two of them, Yuseol then breathed a sigh of relief. He felt that it seemed that he had managed to survive. After a while, Yuseol finally reached the other side of the cliff and gathered with a group of mages who had saved him earlier. After observing them for a moment, Yuseol then saw the female mage who had saved him earlier. He then immediately approached her and thanked her for helping him earlier. But, Yuseol got a pretty cold response from her. The female mage said that she didn't do it expecting thanks, so she told him not to think about it. Yuseol was stunned for a moment at her response, but he didn't really mind. The female mage had the prettiest voice he had ever heard in his life, but she seemed to be difficult to approach. Regardless, Yuseol then went back to thinking about the people who were chasing him earlier, although they were known as bandits who plundered nearby villages. In fact, most of such actions were carried out by the dark demon cult. But Yuseol could heave a sigh of relief now, because the instant he came out of this cliff, he had entered the territory of the mages, and the dark demonic humans would not be able to chase him anymore. Moreover, they don't even know who he is. While Yuseol was daydreaming, he was then surprised by the sudden appearance of a system notification beside him. It was a system notification informing him that he had entered the second episode, enrolling in the Stella Academy. Reading that, Yuseol wondered, is this the second episode? He felt that this did not sound difficult. But after he read the notification more carefully and saw the word Stella Academy, he suddenly felt uncomfortable. He was a little difficult to accept being told to go through school again at this age. After a short chat, they then continued their journey by riding a horse-drawn carriage. It was already midnight. In the horse-drawn carriage, Yuseol seemed to be fast asleep there, but he suddenly showed a little movement and groaned. He was dreaming at this time, a dream about the past of Baek Yuseol. In the dream, little Baek Yuseol in a cheerful tone called his mother. He said that he would become a mage when he grew up. His mother smiled when she heard her son's dreams. She said that she believed in him. The next story is, Baek Yuseol then studied diligently to achieve his goals. He was holding a book at this time. It was a used magical text that his father and mother gave him from the results of saving hard work. He would study hard and make his parents proud. Baek Yuseol was not playing around. He was really serious in achieving his goals. He even often fell asleep from reading too much. And his mother would bring a blanket to cover his body. But, after that sweet moment, we arrived at the moment when Yuseol received bad news related to him. He and his mother were visiting a doctor at that time. His mother in a tone of disbelief asked the doctor, "Did you just say that my child has mana leakage syndrome?" Baek Yuseol's face looked incredulous when he heard the news. He really couldn't accept his ideals just ran aground. He then couldn't stem his tears anymore, and cried loudly there. Watching the scene, Yuseol confusedly wondered, is this Baek Yuseol's memory, or my memory? He then woke up from his sleep right at that moment. He held his head because he felt dizzy after suddenly waking up from his sleep, but his attention was then immediately distracted when he turned his head towards the carriage window. It was already morning. Seeing him awake, a male mage in front of him asked, "Are you awake?" He just wanted to wake him up. Soon they would reach Lazoica, the satellite city of Arcanium. After a while, the horse carriage they were riding then stopped somewhere. They decided to rest at that place for a while. When Yuseol was stretching his body comfortably, he was then surprised when he saw the person in front of him. It was the female mage who had saved him yesterday. Yuseol suddenly fell silent without knowing what to say at this time. Seeing him, the female mage then turned her face away from him and walked away. Yuseol could only smile wryly at that. She was completely ignorant. Putting that aside, Yuseol was surprised that the situation was fine. Even though he was worried before, he was grateful that the time was closer to modern times than medieval. There was magic in the Aether World, but in a safe city, trains and flying ships and warp holes could be seen everywhere, which made long-distance travel convenient. His group was also planning to go to Lazoica by flying ship. Lazoica was on the route of Arcanium, and the real episode started in Arcanium, the city of magic. There are many famous magic towers and also mage knight armies as well as 5 famous academies in Arcanium, and the academy that has the strongest mages and the most excellent students is Stella Academy. That is also the place Yuseol will go, because it is famous for its reputation as one of the best academies. Stella is filled with geniuses and nobles from all over the world. He still doesn't understand how Baek Yuseol managed to get accepted there. Yuseol then remembered something important. He hadn't checked the skills he had. First of all, he then checked the mana leakage syndrome. It was still at level 1, although it was like a disease, but it increased his strength by 0.3%, his agility by 0.5%, and his sensitivity by 10%. It also made him have 2 very useful skills, namely Sixth Sense and Detection Acceleration. Sixth Sense requires mind power to activate it. It can detect mana in a 12-meter radius and activate Detection Acceleration automatically when it detects danger. Reading the description of the 2 skills, Yuseol was sure that he would have died if not for these 2 things. Mana leakage syndrome is a cursed physique that stops him from accumulating mana in his body. This is a kind of permanent curse that Baek Yuseol has, but, on the other hand, this makes him able to detect the mana around him with Sixth Sense. He can also sense any attack coming at him even though he is not looking in that direction. Detection acceleration allows him to sense things as if time has slowed down when there is a threat or attack coming at him faster than human reaction speed. This is an important skill for Baek Yuseol because he cannot use mana, although the skill sounds powerful, but he cannot use sixth sense for long. This skill uses a lot of mind power, so the consequences after using it are quite large. After that, Yuseol then checked his status. Baek Yuseol has strength 1 star 59%, agility 1 star 81%, endurance 0 star 97%, sensitivity 1 star 97%, stamina 1 star 51%, and mind power 1 star 43%. That's pretty decent stats. For the beginning, the original Baek Yuseol has low sensitivity, but it seems that he took part of the status of the Baek Yuseol character he played. In the Aether World, there is not just one level, but one for each stats. Skills are in the form of levels, and stats are in the form of stars. The maximum level of status is 9 stars, but basically it is difficult to achieve. He has been playing this game for more than 10 years, but the highest level he managed to achieve is 8 stars for stamina and sensitivity, but for now, he is thinking of investing in sensitivity to increase his sixth sense and reaction speed. After all, he could increase stamina and flexibility through other means. After finishing checking his status, Yuseol then thought about the mana leakage syndrome he had, although this limited him, but if he did not train this, he would not be able to survive for long. He had to upgrade it to the secrets of nature physique as soon as possible. The way to strengthen mana leakage syndrome was inside Stella Academy. If he wanted to stop the apocalypse and cure his syndrome, that meant he had no choice but to go there. He could only sigh resignedly when it came to that conclusion. He really didn't want to go there. Yuseol wished he had something that could help him. After Yuseol continued to check his system, he then saw a notification telling him that he had missed some notifications. He was quite surprised when he read that, but before he could even check, the mages suddenly approached him and invited him to get back on the carriage. They would continue their journey in a moment. Yuseol understood. He said he would get on in a moment. He decided to check the notifications later. As Yuseol was walking towards the carriage, the female mage who had saved him yesterday suddenly glanced at him. After a long journey on the carriage, they were now finally boarding the flying ship. An announcement then appeared from the flying ship. "We are currently heading to the Arcanium. Please fasten your seat belts." While several people who looked like nobles were chatting with their acquaintances, one of them then confusedly looked in a direction. He was looking at Yuseol, who seemed to be walking alone now. He felt that he was like a lost child. Hearing that, his friends wondered if he had never been on a flying ship before. They felt that he must be a country bumpkin. He clucked irritably. He didn't understand why Stella let the bumpkin in. Feeling that he was being talked about, Yuseol then turned to them, but they still continued their insults. It's supposed to be the most renowned in the world. They're sullying the waters with these lowly folks. Yuseol was just silent when he heard that. He didn't look offended by their insults at all. He then just sighed at their behavior. He then just left there. Yuseol thought, kids are all the same wherever you go, but they seemed to take offense at his attitude. One of them asked him, "Did you just sigh at us?" He looked very upset about it. Seeing Yuseol, who kept walking while ignoring him, he then told him to stop, but he was then confused when he heard the commotion from behind him. While looking back, he wondered, why is everyone so noisy? But he was then surprised by what he saw. There was a girl with a graceful appearance walking there. They called her Princess Bayan. Hearing that name, Yuseol then looked back. The girl was the princess of the Adalabit kingdom, Hong Bayan Adalabit. They all looked fascinated and surprised when they saw her. The noble boy earlier then immediately put on a respectful attitude while calling her, but he then immediately trembled when Bayan looked at him coldly. The noble boy wanted to say something to her, but not a single word came out of his mouth. He then could only helplessly watch her walk away. He could only feel bitter about it. As Bayan walked past Yuseol, Yuseol then glanced at her for a moment. He thought, so, she is the violinist of this world, huh? Hong Bayan is one of the main characters of this game. She and the female lead are always arguing. No matter which route you choose, in the end, she dies. In some endings, she is brutally murdered, and in other endings, she is bullied by all the academy students before being expelled. Besides that, she had to go through something so humiliating that she never appeared in public again, as if the developer has his own hatred and wants her to suffer. He had heard that she was very popular among male players. It turned out that she was indeed beautiful, but it felt like she would kill him if he talked to her. While Yuseol was thinking about that, his stomach suddenly rumbled. Facing that, Yuseol thought maybe he should eat something. When he arrived at the cafeteria, he then saw various luxurious foods displayed there, but that made him undo his intention to eat. The food there was very expensive, he was even confused about it, so he decided to eat. When he arrived at the Arcanium, an announcement suddenly sounded again. At this time, the passengers immediately put their ears to listen. An announcement for everyone: we will soon arrive at the Arcanium in 10 minutes, please head to the first floor. The speaker then repeated the announcement once again. Yuseol smiled slightly hearing that. He thought, is it finally starting? He has accepted the current reality. He has considered that this is his reality now. With a confident face, he muttered, let's do this.